topic is very important because it is evolving very rapidly. So what I'm going to present to you purely is from a policy regulatory kind of framework, because that's what I've been involved in, right? You want to ask the tech stuff, you ask Joseph and the rest of the other speakers, right? For me, it's really looking at how we manage this landscape as it evolves and the impact it has, not just in Singapore, but how we organize ourselves as a society. So I'm going to start playing a short video. I know some people feel insulted. Why should I see a video on AI? I know what it's all about, right? But the reason I want to play this video because it's quite interesting. It's old, but it carries very useful ideas. We know about the machine learning part. We know about the great things that it can do, but also the downside, right? But the last part, the more of us are involved in the discussion, the better it is, because it's about how you deploy this within society, understanding the impact and what you do about those things, right? So what is AI? I won't go into too much detail. It can be both a hardware and a software. And there are two types of AI. Narrow AI, which is basically what this video was done before ChatGPT and generative AI. Or the other type called general AI, general artificial intelligence, where ChatGPT is the hero of the day, right? It's basically supposed to be this machine that is so smart, right? That it can tell you that, things that you don't understand. But actually, it's not that smart. Okay, there are problems with hallucinations. Right? All right, so these are some examples that you come across about some of the problems that in the past when people tried to use AI. This was done by the Economist, right? They took two data sets of public images, Google Open Images and Image Tag. About 30-40% are pictures of women, 5% people are listed as dark, and they want to see the effects of sex and race, or gender and race, on how people are depicted. And guess what? Men turn out to be more professional, women tend to occupy lower rungs on the occupational hierarchy, and so on and so forth. So obviously the bias in the data and how it's being structured. This is a more serious example, right? This is what happened in the US, using the criminal justice system, using facial recognition technology. The person on the left-hand side is darker skin, is deemed to be high risk. The person on the right-hand side is lighter skin, he's doing lower risk. But as it turns out, it was the other way around, right? And so the machine made mistakes. And I want to emphasize this point because we tend to now, cry hallelujah, we have found nirvana. But I think we must not forget, even though ChatGPT or other forms of generative AI can do miraculous things, it is still a machine. It's not human, right? So the other one, of course, this one is deep fake. This is very interesting. This company called Darktrace, Ensign will know they're basically in cybersecurity, but they decided to go into this area. So this was an advertisement. It says one of these people doesn't exist. Right? And so today, there's a lot of discussions, and even in Singapore, Minister Josephine Teo has said that we're going to come out with a law against deepfake during the 9 days of election. I feel like telling Minister Teo that we should have it throughout the year. Right? Because deepfakes will affect all of us. All right, so ChatGPT, right? Started with GPT-3. Now people forget this, Before November 2022, when ChatGPT became free, and therefore we became the product, by the way, because they're learning from us. It was already available as a service, and people were using it. And see some of the concerns. We know it can generate text with minimal human input, recognize patterns, emails, and so on and so forth. Today, I know many civil servants use ChatGPT to draft their emails and some of the papers that they use for their meetings, right? But there are some problems with it. In the early days of ChatGPT, when we asked the question, who's the Prime Minister of Malaysia? They didn't say Anwar Ibrahim, they said Sabarici, because the training data was until September. Then when we corrected it, it came back the next time and says, well, this is up to September, you have to correct. So obviously they are learning as we go, as we basically use the system, right? So the concerns are that it could create malicious code, and people in cybersecurity are worried about this, right? Phishing attacks, spear phishing content, easier for criminals, misinformation, which is the one that we worry most, that can be created and then basically undermine stability in society. It can be very confident, authoritative, yet can be completely wrong, right? So we did an experiment in AI Singapore. We asked ChatGPT to draft us a scientific article with references. Brilliant. All the references are fake, right? So obviously it doesn't have the ability, so you just dream of something, right? And then of course, you add deepfake technology, you can simulate both video and audio of people. So it's quite dangerous as a technology.
This is an article that came out about a year and a half ago, reflecting the concerns, right? This is one of the concerns here, that the idea that tech companies get to build whatever they want and release it into the world and scramble to adjust, make way for that thing is backwards. Essentially, tech companies will just release their software. And then after that, they send you patches, right? Because they can never be 100% perfect. And so the recent incident of CrowdStrike is a very good example of how interdependent we are. And if there's a mistake, a lot of people will be affected. This was about the European Act. Organizations are driving towards commercializing, but they're equally talking about how the ensuring is being done in a responsible manner. So the concerns are already there about how you manage this new technology. So what are some of the concerns that you can summarize with AI? Governance, who decides on innovation, deployment in case of consumer harm. Something happens because the machine makes a mistake, who's responsible, right? And then privacy and cybersecurity, because a lot of data is being used. How is data being used? How is it being protected? Because you may have an attack. Legal liability for the software. Something goes wrong, who is responsible? Right? Autonomous vehicles going on the road, seeing a lady, decided to elat the lady and hit the wall. But was it designed that way, or it will hit the lady because it was supposed to protect it? Who's responsible? The machine, the software, the state in which you're using it, or the country, and so on and so forth. And then ethics and transparency, because the algorithms are never neutral, right? If we believe they're neutral, we got it wrong, because it replicates some of the things that we as humans understand, the bias and the prejudices that we have. And of course, the biases in data and algorithm. Good example is, of course, facial recognition technology. There's a good video by this lady who did a PhD in MIT, a bit too long, 4 minutes, but she actually examined different data sets and different engines and realized that misclassification was just too obvious, right? Women, dark color skin are deemed to be less in terms of professionalism compared to the white candidates. Okay, so because of all these concerns, there's a huge body of literature called AI ethics, right? A lot of people have been writing about it, basically. So you're interested, you Google, there are tons of material out there. Now, this is interesting because the response would be, okay, we know it's not perfect, so what do? Let's build ethical principles into the machine, right? Now, the big tech likes this. Why? Because they don't want to be regulated. So what is the company that came out? It was Microsoft. Microsoft with the Peace Institute decided, hey, right, let's make sure we're in the game and we try and direct the conversation. But ultimately, we had to put big tech at the center because they're also responsible. So this is, if you're interested, there's a lot of discussion on this, including the Pope has also come out with a statement, you know, ethics, AI should be fair, ethical, and so on. So these are good statements, right, which we will call motherhood statements, but that's the way they try to respond to this particular challenge. So there's a guideline, there's an inventory. People have collected all of this ethics guideline that countries, some jurisdictions, some companies have produced. All right, let me now move into how are some jurisdictions are responding, right? So the EU is the only region in the world that has a regulation for AI. Just past this year, right? You have 2 years to implement until August 2026. So the EU Act takes a risk-based approach, right? Essentially ascertaining that if your particular machine has a high risk of going wrong, it has certain obligation. So there's some unacceptable risks where they deem to be not right to do, therefore it's banned. If you're high risk, you have strict obligation, limited risk, some obligation, and so on and so forth. But the interesting thing is that the scope covers all generations of AI applications. That means even the past version. Secondly, the burden is on the AI provider in the EU, irrespective where the provider is. So you could be a company in Singapore providing service in EU, you fall under this act. So I read a recent report, there are some companies pulling out of EU because they just feel it's too onerous to meet the requirements of the EU AI Act, right? And this is just tell you some of the areas, right? Critical infrastructure and so on and so forth. These are the obligations which are needed. So this is the EU. Now, the United Nations also have gotten into the act, right? UNSG Antonio Guterres announced last year, we need to have this kind of a working group to advise the UN how to manage AI. Now, it's interesting, right? You have asked yourself, why is the EU interested? The UN is interested. Climate change is a global problem. And though there's an agreement on climate change and so on and so forth. But why AI, right? Because he feels that this problem is going to spread across mankind. And if you don't have the right resources available and so on and so forth, some countries may be left behind, some countries may not have the ability to benefit from this new technology. So this is just a timeline, and so I want to show you because we are now here. The final report is out. In fact, they're debating it now in New York, right? So let me just go through the report very quickly. So this is how the front page of the reports look like. 7 recommendations. Very interesting. First, a panel, a scientific panel on AI. Now, I'm familiar with climate change because I was minister for 7 years when I was doing environment. And so there is an IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, right? Where all the climate experts come together and produce a report and says, hey, it's getting warmer and so on and so forth, right? So he wants a panel. Then standards exchange, all right? So that you can talk to each other. There's some common sort of language in which you can talk to each other. Then capacity development network. Why? Because you feel that some countries may not have the resources, right? The question is who's going to pay for this, right? So money is very important. Then you talk about a data framework, which is quite interesting. So that the data, right, is in a way synchronized or harmonized across different regions. So that then people can use data from different parts of the world. Then there's the Global Fund for AI. We haven't even contributed for the Climate Change Fund. So now there's a fund for AI. So world states put money in, right, to help the global south to catch up. Then some policy dialogue and AI governance and the secretariat. So you have bureaucracy, all right, to basically to enforce all of the, or to ensure the implementation of all these recommendations. It will be discussed in the UN now. It will be accepted, right? But the question is, how do you implement it? How do you ensure it gets implemented? So the 3 takeaways is that they want to do what? They want to foster a world where AI can flourish while safeguarding human rights and promoting global equity. Secondly, the stakes are very high, but only when you have global action which is coordinated, you can then empower the developing nations to benefit from AI and AI's potential to be harnessed while mitigating its risks. And finally, there are growing concerns about AI risks, such as disinformation and bias. Therefore, it drives the urgency for international regulation. This is not regulation yet. It's going to be maybe an agreement. All the leaders who are there, our foreign ministers there, Vivian probably sign on it and say, okay, well, how we do it back home, that's a different matter altogether. What about Singapore, right? What's our journey like? Well, we started quite late actually, August 2018. For the record, I stepped down already, so I'm not responsible. And it was in the makings, right? So we formed an advisory council led by a retired judge on ethical use of AI and data. We announced our national strategy in 2019, and these are the 2 reasons. We launched our Nation AI Strategy 2.0, November 2023, by DPM Wong, then currently Prime Minister. And then we launched a model governance framework in 2019. Second edition in 2020, both was done in Davos by Minister Iswaran. Anyway, that's a separate matter. And then we launched AI Verify, right, which is a testing framework. And finally, we now have a model generative AI model generative AI governance framework. The reason why I'm showing you this timeline is very interesting. How do we respond, right? Okay, first we decided, let's look at how ethics can be built into anything that we want to do in terms of AI, right? And then on top of that, we talk about a national strategy because we want to see AI not just within a small sector of society, but across the whole country. Then finally, we realized that we need some kind of a framework to help people to implement AI, right? That framework was updated twice. And then testing. A lot of debate about AI, algorithms, audit, assessment, evaluation. So we decided to come up with what we call AI Verify. In the UK, there's an institute called Ada Lovelace. They are the one who's promoting audits of AI algorithm. Not easy, millions and millions of lines of code. How are you going to go in and audit them, right? And finally, because of generative AI, we decided to do the same thing to have a framework. So this is our national strategy. I won't go into much detail, but the idea is that we want to focus attention and resources at the national level, how government, companies, and researchers can work together, and where are the areas that we need to pay attention to. This is the ecosystem, right? It's all built in to make sure that there's partnership, talent and education, the right data architecture, trusted environment, international collaboration. These are some of the projects. Right now, the projects have been sort of increased beyond just these areas. And this is the strategy 2.0, launched by DPM Lawrence Wong. Most importantly is that this year's budget, right, he's still finance minister, wasn't prime minister yet, launched the 2.0 with the view of trying to promote Singapore's economic growth in 4 areas: industry, talent, trusted environment, and compute. But this is the big figure. We're putting aside $1 billion over 5 years, right? Not sure how the money is going to be used, but we want to push this as much as possible. So Singapore is placing a huge bet on AI as a horizontal, right? Therefore, you have all the vertical areas. Will it work? We do not know. But what about the problems that we talked about earlier, right? So these are the ethical principles in our model framework. 12 of them. And in my other classes I teach at the Lee Kuan Yew School, and I always joke, this is all the 12 that you can find across the whole world. It's everything that people talk about, right? So this is supposed to be built into our model framework. And this is how our model framework looks like. Again, this is a guide, right? So you have principles for responsible AI. It must be explainable, transparent, fair, human-centric. 4 areas to consider. You have your governance structure in place. You have to determine the level of human involvement, operations management, and of course you have stakeholder interaction. All the nice things. Level of human involvement, right? So we take, again, almost like a risk-based approach, what we call level of harm, right? So severity and probability of harm. If your product very low in terms of likelihood of harm, is human out of the loop. In other words, you can let the machine run by itself, search engines and so on and so forth. If it's medium, the likelihood that something can go wrong, human over the loop. So one of the projects that we did in AI Singapore, we worked with IBM on this one for their manufacturing, factory here in Singapore. But this is the one that we should worry about when the harm is very high, mainly in medical application, human in the loop, right? So ask yourself, right? Do you want a doctor to sign off for your operation, or you want the machine to sign off? You obviously want the doctor because something goes wrong, you can sue the doctor. You cannot sue the machine, right? So therefore, human in the loop becomes important. A lot of medical applications. So one of the experiments that we did with a company called Renal Team, they do hemodialysis, kidney patient, ran the experiment, they loved the product, now working on a second, project with them. So AI Verify, again, how do we ensure that whatever that you come up with meets some standards? So this is by IMDA. They came out with this thing called AI Verify so that you can test your system against international recognized AI governance through some standardized tests. It is an attempt by the Singapore government to give assurance that whatever engine that is available, you can put this on top of your engine, test it, and it meets some of the standardized tests, right? Of course, what they did was that they worked in consultation with some of the big boys, and some of them are using it. It was released in May, and now we're expanding it to do the capability for generative AI, right? So you Google it, it looks something like this. This is almost like the Terminator. These are some of the details. But essentially, right, we realize that if we want to do AI in Singapore, we must have an ethical approach, so the 12 ethics. Then there's a framework that helps you. Then if you're not so sure, we have this product to help you to test whether or not the product has gone wrong or not, and how you can improve it. All optional, not mandatory. So this is the framework for generative AI, right? It just released this year. All right, the national effort that we have is AI Singapore, right? It was launched during my time in 2017. We gave money to NUS from NRF, set up a center to run 100 experiments. The current director was my former student, so I can pull rank with him a bit. So he's been very helpful, Lawrence, to make sure that we push this out, right? And these are the 6 areas they're involved in: research, governance, technology, and talent. It's a lot of training programs run by AI Singapore, right? So you want to be an AI certified engineer, sign up for them, right? I'm selling a bit of marketing for them, basically, right? But it's a good program, right? So 2 years of COVID, guess what? I signed up to learn Python programming so that I improve my programming skills. Why? Because I was an old student for Fortran, so I needed to update my programming knowledge. So I used the government database, I downloaded, I ran programs and so on and so forth. So this is the 100 experiments that we are supposed to do, whereby we approach industry. This is not for government. The idea is to socialize AI within the industry using the model framework, develop models for them. But instead of just giving them the model, we work together, and in that process, we develop talent and capability within the company, right? So you, as an organization, this is what you can offer. We at AI Singapore, this is the matching grant, and then we go through and work out, you get a real-world AI model, plus 3 to 5 Singaporean certified AI engineers, right? So it's a great model. We 80 odd experiments, did well. Government liked it so much, give us an additional money for another 100 experiments. So I told Lawrence I would check our next on the block, we have to produce another 120 odd. But I think the most important thing is that we're trying to, in a way, socialize the idea of AI in Singapore. So the range of companies are fantastic. Dental company, food F&B, food and beverages, basically, transport, logistics, right? Education, medical, and what have you, right? So this is again another effort. And again, it's not mandatory. You want to do it, there's a way for you to, for us to help you using the model framework. So my claim to fame is this: when I retired, I was with Singapore Computer Society, we decided to take the model framework and develop into what we call a book of knowledge, help industry, how they can implement AI for their own company's needs and so on and so forth. All right, so some final thoughts before we end. My timing is okay, right, Prishan? I'm okay? Oh, 5 minutes left, okay. I had to ask the question. So we know it can generate a lot of social benefits, improve living conditions, facilitate justice, but it poses a lot of problems also, restricting the choice of individuals, lowering living standards, and so on and so forth. A couple of weeks ago, all right, something that I thought will happen one day happened in Singapore. There was an article, there's a letter to the foreign page in the Straits Times. The letter writer asked, right, all this engine for hiring, how do we know it's fair, right? And he's right. Today I was told, I gave a talk to another group of SMU students, and the guy stood up and said, yes sir, today when you submit a job application, it doesn't go to the HR, it goes to the machine, and the machine sorts it out, right? So he asked the question. I've not seen the reply yet actually, because nobody knows, right, whether or not there's bias in the system and so on and so forth, right? And so it's interesting that people are now waking up to the idea, wait a minute, right? The machines are making a decision, what should I do about it, right? So these are some of the things that we have to think about, and of course, this is a huge technological change. Should we leave it to the innovators, which happened in the past? Right? They are the one who set the tone because they know how it works and so on and so forth, but is it right? So if I put the other hat, cybersecurity, right? We decided when we do security, it cannot be an afterthought. It will be upfront. That's what we call security by design. So you bring the security people when you're designing your software so you can build into it, right? So the principle and guidelines lay the foundation. It helps to develop AI towards a morally desirable end. So the ethical framework promotes intentional recognize human rights, and this must be compatible with the protection of fundamental human capacities and goals. So AI ethics is correct, right? Because you have to preserve what is important in human society, but is it sufficient? So, sorry, I'm jumping, okay. Just another example. This is an old example, by the way, but you already know, right? Now ChatGPT and all the new generative AI can do this, right? This was a software where you can actually take a picture of a woman and denude her for 50 bucks, basically, right, at that time. Of course, there was a backlash, and then he took it down. So it shows that some of this invention, there are moral risks, and the current tech allows the development of AI, which is quite offensive and abusive. right? So the impact on privacy, job displacement are not insignificant either. And so it's up to citizens to determine the moral and political end. So that video I played, right, it was good because it's ultimately he says society has to decide, right? How are you going to deploy it? At the moment, there's a lot of conversation in Singapore taking place, right? We're using it, but there's not a lot of conversation, which I think we should try and change that. So, is it time for regulations? The question is, what are we regulating, right? And so, impacts on jobs, privacy, ability to manipulate, and so on and so forth. So, effective and smart regulation always focus on prioritizing the effects of the new technology, right? For example, why do we license guns, right? You can own a gun in Singapore, right, by certain criteria. You license it because a gun can be used for, to kill people and so on and so forth, and therefore issues of liability, and therefore you want to make sure that the person is accountable. So the effects. So it will be pervasive, it's already pervasive. The challenge, of course, is that the speed. The speed is very, very fast, right? New products that come into the market. I was just watching a video the other day with my wife, can't remember what it is, but some new fancy new tool is coming out by one of the big tech company. They can do marvelous things, right? So defining new technology in terms of the effects and restructuring their policies to deal with it will allow you to move beyond the fear of new technology. If you understand it, right, you understand what is it doing, where it has gone wrong, and you develop the policies, then you know how to manage it. So the purpose of the 100 experiments and all the application in government is actually to build knowledge about this particular new technology. Because the truth of the matter is, we don't understand it 100%, right? I am not against tech. I think tech is useful, but I think we need to understand it and use it responsibly, right? So hence regulation is about targeting the effects of the new technology. All right, what are the options that we have? EU, regulation. UN, global agreement. Singapore, guidance. So there's a spectrum. Where do you want to move? Countries are now jumping, right? China said they have a set of regulations. California decided, forget about the Biden Act, they want to do something in California, and so on and so forth, right? And the G7 has come up with their own ideas. There's a Hiroshima plan. A lot of things out there, right? And you can put it along this spectrum because it's either you regulate or you don't regulate. And if you don't regulate, where do you want to land? So Singapore is still here, right? It's guidance, it's not regulation yet. Will we regulate one day?
Yeah.
I think we will,
Yes.
right? But by the time we regulate, we won't feel alarmed. Why? Because we're familiar with it. We know what it means. We know what is the harm that we're trying to protect users from, basically. So Singapore government, very smart, right? Okay, never mind, enough. Okay, I want to compare this to the history of the automobile. I wrote an article for Singapore Computer Society. I thought it's useful, but you can compare with any other industry. So, 1908, Henry Ford, first commercial sale, Model T, right? There's 1908. No seat belts, no protection. When did seat belts came? 1959, the 3-point seat belt. So from 1908 to 1959, I was trying to Google how many deaths and fatalities and all the disabilities that came along, right? Because at that time, they were just trying to improve in terms of your speed against a horse-drawn carriage. But it took them almost 50 years to develop seat belts. Today, we have airbags in our car. That is early 1970s, right? And so, it is a mature industry with an ecosystem, regulation, maintenance, repair, and so on and so forth. You need that. Third-party insurance and whatever. Today, you have rental cars. So it is all done safely. It's like air travel, right? Can you imagine you're in that piece of metal hurtling through space at 500 miles an hour? You didn't think about it, right? But because of all the work that has been done to minimize the risk, you have the confidence that you can use it safely. But of course, we have AVs coming, right? And therefore, we need to change again. And the regime will change because there are other considerations, right? So the entire ecosystem therefore needs to be adapted because the technology is moving, but we're not there yet, right? We don't have laws for EVs yet. We're testing it, but we really don't have laws. The question is, what about AI? Do we need seat belts for AI? Right? When? How? Do you have to wait for 50 years? Exactly. So something for us to think about. Where are we going to start thinking about some of the regulations that we can put in place now? Now let me give you an example. There is a global agreement on child pornography, correct? It's considered harmful. Whole world has accepted it basically. And so you cannot sell, make, whatever the case may be, and it's a crime, no matter where you are basically, right? The question is, can there be such an agreement where deepfakes is considered a crime, a global crime, and therefore you have laws against it and what have you. Of course, enforcement will be a big problem, but there are concerns of that nature. And so, that's my last slide. So my question is, what should we do about AI? I think we should think about it. My personal opinion is that I don't think we should go back to the cave, right? We should move forward. Well, we should move forward with our eyes open, not just with the tech people, but I think you need a broad spectrum of people who understand the technology, understand the implication, and we need to work in concert. So I go back to that first video. The last word that the video said was, the more people are involved in this, the better it is for us to shape it, right? So I think that's how we should approach this technology. So thank you very much. I'll end here. We have a panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Lauren, and I'm a final year computing and law student, and I'll be a moderator for today. With me on the panel, we have Josh, Firdaus, Xiang Zheng, and Prof. Yaacob, and we're so excited to be talking about AI governance. Alright, so we just went through a masterclass about AI governance and the history and what are the different types of regulations out there. So maybe I can just start us off by asking the panel to introduce themselves, and so we can learn a little bit more about what they do. So maybe we can start with Josh. Perhaps you can start to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lauren, and thanks again, Prof, for that wonderful masterclass. It really sparked a lot of thoughts in my head. I just want to say that first, this is an interesting venue to be at, because the last time I was here was during my Zoom days. I'm not going to share how long ago that was. But what I will say is that I graduated from SMU from the law school in 2015, did practice, went to the Ministry of Law, was working on some legislation. Afterwards, I went to the Personal Data Protection Commission. So actually, some of the initiatives that we saw earlier, like the Model AI Governance Framework, AI Verify, those were things that my team was doing. So when Prof just now mentioned we were a bit late on this, I'm like, sorry, Prof, we will work harder next time. Thank you. But I also want to say that everything that, just to make things candid, right? Everything that we share in this room, it's my own personal views. So please don't attribute them to any organization I'm in or was in. After PDPC, I went to do my further studies. I came back. So I joined this global non-profit organization called the Future of Privacy Forum. So we are a think tank. We focus on thought leadership with regard to privacy, data protection, and emerging critical technologies like AI governance, AI regulation. So again, when Prof was mentioning all those details just now, my head was just buzzing, and I'm very, very excited to be in this discussion. The way I see the value add to this discussion is, if you're at the first level, where you're at the generalist level, just trying to find out more, I think this panel is excellent. Further, in your organizations, if you are tasked or you have some responsibility with regard to working on some aspect of AI governance, I think this panel will be excellent for you. Now, if any of you are already deep in the weeds regarding AI governance and regulation, I'm happy to take that conversation later on as well to discuss more in depth, and we can geek out over bottles of wine later on. So that's an introduction about myself. Thank you.
How do I follow that? I don't know why you choose me on this panel. Okay. Hi guys. My name is Firdaus. I graduated from SMU Information Systems in 2008. I went to the civil service after that, and I worked for Prof. Yaacob. And then I got accepted to law school. I did my JD and went to one partnership for a wonderful few years in litigation. And then I am now in-house counsel, right? So we have on this panel Prof. Yaacob, who is the mastermind in Singapore governance framework for AI, and you have somebody who actually teaches AI. I was wondering, what am I going to talk about? So I did what anyone would do. I asked ChatGPT. I'm like, what should I talk about? And as expected, it gave me nothing useful. But what I would, what I'll go into is, I have some experience in the corporate world. So I've been housed in a global cloud company. So I can give you some views on what the corporate world is doing in terms of AI, some socio-economic aspect to that, blah, blah, the costs I think we can talk about, and maybe the kind of opportunities that you guys are looking for in the AI industry, what's available, what is needed. I think it's a very exciting, hair on fire kind of space, and we'll talk about it.
Hi everyone, I'm Xiang Zheng. So I'm the VP of Advisory at Ensign InfoSecurity. I've been a career consultant, cutting across many different fields. I first graduated in computer engineering. Subsequently, my adventure with SMU began with me as a student of LM, and I graduated in 2015. I'm multidisciplinary and I'm a cyber strategist at Ensign. Multidisciplinary in the sense of computer science, computer engineering, law, business, as well as public policy. So I'm a core member at this think tank that's funded by the Swiss government, which is the Geneva Dialogue for Responsible Behaviors in Cyberspace. And I also am a technical representative for Ensign as a research sponsor to the Mitre and Genity Center for Threat Informed Defense. Needless to say, I told the moderator actually, I'm the catch-all for anything that they can't deal with, because I address international issues, as well as both deep tech, deep law, and deep business. So risk management is my trade, and I cut across all these disciplines to help make sense for executives as well as leadership in navigating all these challenges, not just uniquely to cybersecurity, business at large, human, social, political as well. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
All right, so thank you everyone. Okay, so I think we'll start off with a fairly simple question, I would say. What does the panel think about the importance of AI governance? Who wants to start? Maybe Prof, you can start.
Well, my entire lecture was saying it's important for us to think about it. I think it is an important topic, primarily because I think of the effects, right? This is not a simple code, but this is a code in which you can do many, many different things. Some good, some bad, basically. And I've always believed that, you know, in a society like Singapore, which is a democracy, when something goes wrong, the people will look to the government, right? And therefore, we need to put in place something so that you can reassure Singaporeans that we are on top of the situation. So that governance structure has to be in place. So the model framework, as I said earlier, is the first shot, right? I think we will reach some point in regulation. I wanted to add something which I don't know why the slide didn't come up. So one of the things that I've always been concerned about is that when something goes wrong, what do? Right? Now in Singapore, you buy a kettle or a cooking pot, something goes wrong, you go to case, right? You complain to consumer protection, blah, 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 and so on. So when that guy wrote a letter to the foreign page questioning, you know, if something goes wrong with this thing that's supposed to hire people and they didn't hire properly, who do they complain to? There is no body in Singapore that's actually responsible for this. So my last speeches in Parliament, I have to tell a bit my story. I made a proposal of a digital commission, right? Something in which whereby people can turn to and say, hey, I have this problem, can you deal with this and help me? So our governance structure should deal not just to ensure that the players play their part, but how to also protect the users, right? And the protection of the users, you require some kind of a policy structure that deals with, okay, redress and so on and so forth. There are 3 lawyers on the panel here, so they know, right, what needs to be done when something goes wrong. but it's not clear yet how do you do that basically, right? So I think this is something which we should think about also. So this is my take on that. Yeah.
I'll take it last. Yeah, I'll take it last.
You're the catch-all thing.
Samsung is the one where, you know, like the multi-ministry task force, you don't know the answer, then everyone look.
Somehow I managed.
Okay, jokes aside, the way that I see, okay, first, lawyers like multi-part answers, so my answer multi-part one. Why is AI governance important? Well, reason number one is because of emerging compliance and regulation, compliance needs and regulatory needs. So, Prof earlier mentioned about the EU AI Act, which is going to start to come into force in phases, starting with about 4 months from now, where I think the list of prohibited risk AI systems will start kicking into effect. So companies are already scrambling. The EU Commission, the EU AI office that they set up is already developing standards to try and test these systems. So it's coming on. Now, China already has hard AI regulations. They have 3. One dealing with algorithmic recommender systems came out in 2021. One dealing with deep synthesis technologies, so a bit like generative AI kind of technologies, 2022. And then generative AI measures came out in 2023, already in force. If you want to use you want to deploy a Gen AI system in China, you need to register with the Cyberspace Administration of China. So the regulations are already there. US at a state level, individual states are coming up. Colorado already has an AI Act, and now California, I think they're debating right in their parliament. So it's coming up, right? But even beyond thinking about AI-specific frameworks, we need to think about the other legislation that is already existing. This also has an impact on AI. IP rules, IP laws, data protection laws, criminal laws, tort laws, civil laws, contract laws, all this already apply to AI. AI does not exist in an unregulated vacuum. So we need to start thinking about AI governance because it helps our companies with compliance and meeting regulatory obligations. Second reason, because of dealing with the direct risks of AI. I think Prof did an excellent job just now, sharing all the ethical and governance issues that we are facing. Bias, discrimination, transparency, accountability, privacy, content moderation, and so on, right? The final level is because of value creation. And one thing I think often in these discussions we often miss out, but is the fundamental core of Singapore's approach to AI governance is not to forget the potential benefits that AI brings. We always talk about the risks, we always talk about regulation, but we forget to talk about the opportunities and benefits it brings. So the reason why we want to comply, the reason why we want to work on AI governance is to build trust. It's a form of value creation. When you do AI well, you deploy it responsibly in your organizations, people trust your organizations, they will use your technologies. And that way, when people actually use these AI systems, you crystallize the potential benefits of these AI systems. Right? So to sum up, again, complying with regulations, mitigating the direct risks of AI, setting up guardrails, and then value creation. I think these are the 3 core reasons why people should start looking at AI governance.
Thank you. I asked ChatGPT, and it says, good governance for AI ensures it's ethical, transparent, and blah, blah, doesn't say anything. So, I feel like sometimes we are we're not there yet with AI. And I always like to try and simplify it to something that really, what's the point here, right? What's the point that will really be relevant to most of us? I think it'll be jobs, right? And the statistic that I have here is conservative estimates 30% of current employee hours in the US can be automated by 2030, and rising up to 70%, right? So governance of AI, how it's being run, how it's being used, whether there's a human in the loop and all that stuff is a good part of it, but there are socio-economic consequences of that we also need to take a look at. And it's not just about making sure that the AI is safe, it's also to make sure that the benefits of AI is equitably shared by all of society. Is something like 70% automated replacement, is that extreme? I don't think so. Over the last 18 months, I've seen massive investment by our companies into AI. Just, I pull out some data. A whole year ago, you have all the CIOs, 80% of them saying they're going to bring in AI or integrate or will integrate AI into their product and services. 80 to 90%. They're increasing the budget to do it. They take budget away from cloud adoption, sustainability, even from employees to do it. They're putting it in already, and the effects are already rolling out. One thing I would like to highlight though, they're rolling out the machine to incorporate AI into their product and services, but 70% of them have not evaluated the risks of AI into their systems, not looked into the consequences of AI on employees and society and all that stuff. Only 5 to 10% have a robust AI governance program in place, or any AI policy at all. So I work for a company called Avaya, AVAYA, and thankfully we do have an AI policy. You can Google AVAYA, Artificial Intelligence Policy, you can see an example of that. 3 main things: AI use policy. So if the employees want to use AI, there's a certain risk assessment that needs to be done, blah, blah, blah. Similar to what you saw, that project, AI onboarding policy, and all the tools will be reviewed by a neutral team, and then the use will be in conjunction with any data protection policies and stuff like that. That's bare minimum. That's how to make sure our AI doesn't kill people or cause harm. But we need to go beyond that. What are the costs of AI? There are environmental sustainability costs of AI. We can talk about that. The sharing of the benefits of AI, we need to talk about that. When 70% of our workforce is affected by AI, that is a crazy world to live in, and that's the kind of world that our kids are going to be in. Are we going to talk about universal basic income? Are we going to talk about who's going to feed me? Can I just paint or skate or write poetry and let the AI do the work? That world is here now, so we got to talk about it.
And so I get to say the things that hopefully they haven't said. I'll try to answer the moderator directly, which is why. And the why is really that the rush to adoption without considering risks, and it's the experimentation by implementation approach that has taken place. And that has actually led towards the integration towards automation, actuation, and decisions. I want to draw a delineation that actually AI does not necessarily mean an activity or a decision has been made. AI technologies or systems only develop insights and conclusions based on the data that they analyze. It doesn't lead towards an action or an outcome immediately by itself. Where the danger has actually happened is the connection or integration into automation, actuation, and decisions. Actuation in the sense of making autonomous vehicles and so on. I resonate on the matter that actually there are already laws, and why we need not have a particular category of law, in my view, for AI is because actually laws are meant to deal with social harms, right? Where there is fear is the rate of adaptation of our existing body of laws towards what the implications AI bring. Similar to the analogy that Prof already highlighted, I brought this analogy to my clients recently, which is actually AI not so sexy, right? It is the calculator moving to the Excel spreadsheet that you suddenly have a lot of skill of doing multiple complex calculations together and then developing insight. So if you think about AI as AI, not the automation, not the actuation, not the decision-making part, this is just the next leap. But this leap is a very big one. So when the earlier panelists already highlighted about economic impact, it's really about the rate of adaptation. Can we deal with 70% of the people where they are trained and only know how to do their job the way they are structured today? How do we deal with the new remuneration model when they don't have that? Now bringing the cyber aspect to it is, AI is actually running on technology that's ever around the world. There is a set of problems that already exist. There's already a set of risks that already exist dealing with the underlying infrastructure. that hasn't been fully solved and may never be fully solved, and yet we're bolting on value-added outcomes on top of it with AI, right? Talking a little bit about the regulatory space, I think Singapore has taken a very cautious but very embracing approach, I feel, because I resonate with what Prof highlighted earlier. I see not so much 3 dimensions or 3 buckets, I see two buckets, similar to common law versus civil law. There is a very rules-based approach, and then there's a very framework-based approach. Singapore has taken more of a framework-based approach. And some of our Asian neighbors take a regulatory sandbox approach, meaning I want to observe the possible risk and harm before I start regulating about it. China has taken a more, I think I've already studied enough and therefore I want to regulate the social harms that I already see out of it. And I think there's no right or wrong, it's culturally appropriate as it is for any society. But why we are taking this approach, I think, is because exactly the benefits. We don't want to lose the benefits, or I call it strangling the unborn or newborn with the umbilical cord, right? I know it sounds gruesome, but yeah. But I think some of us would have seen Minority Report, the 3 kind of precognition people that have psychic powers to go and predict the future. And are we trying to kill that up front, or are we doing something wrong when no harm has actually materialized? I think the larger, greater challenge is also the enforcement and measurement issues. How do we actually measure the degree of harm, and how do we actually establish what's the risk threshold we have? When we say this as an organization, it's easy because the boundaries are limited. But when we say this as a society, there are too many variables and varieties that exist. There is where it's hard to identify what the baseline looks like and what the appetite means for the society. Because you stratify the society, certain groups will be say, I'm actually a risk taker, I can accept the risk. Another group in the stratification will then say, actually, I cannot accept any of the risk. Because my job is totally displaced. And I might take another 3 years out of my job, out of employment, to go and learn new skills so that I can be, a functioning member of society. So I hope that.
So may I jump in with one quick point? I wanted to echo what Xiang Zheng said about Singapore's approach. When I teach, I teach as an adjunct prof in the law school on AI law, policy and ethics. One of the questions that one of the students first asked me, Singapore always number 1 in everything, literally everything. Why are we not number 1 in regulating AI? So it's a common question that comes up in different forms over the course of my class. And the simple answer I share with them is this. Remember Singapore's fundamental truths, which is that we are a price taker, not a price setter. We can very easily set our own regulations, we can very easily set our own standards. Sure, will the AI companies come here? No, they can very easily flow to the rest of the region. And it will happen, for example, Apple Intelligence, right? Why are they delaying the rollout in the EU beyond other countries? Because they say they need to study the complexities of the EU AI Act together the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, GDPR, Data Act. It is a compliance headache for companies if you just jump in with a law like that, especially when it's untested. So remember that truth. What we want to be is not first. What we want to be is smart. Thank you.
Thank you so much for, very loud, sorry. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think what we discussed a lot on this panel was actually also the question of how to balance innovation and regulation. Maybe we can talk about that for a minute, and this was actually one of the questions in the registration.
Balance between regulation and innovation. I mean, when I was in the ministry, we were doing the digital transformation, we wanted to do a couple of things. The question is, how do you find the right spot, the sweet spot, to make sure that you can encourage the innovation, private sector put in money, knowing that if they do something that they will be protected if something goes wrong, and how do you make sure that the end user is also protected? Let's take an example, right? In the early days of the telecoms liberalization sector, Anybody old enough like me to remember that? Consumer protection was very high, right? Basically, and wanted to make sure that you don't go into a contract and then Singtel make sure you sign something and you're stuck into it, basically, right? But when it was thought about that day, because we want to help Singtel and StarHub grow so that we have a base, then we realized that that's not the right thing to do, you know? We need to give choices to the consumer also. So we have to change that slightly. So I think as long as you are prepared to learn and change, I think it's always good to do innovation and regulation in tandem, because that's what society is looking for you, right? If all we do is regulate and we don't encourage innovation, people are not prepared to put money into the new sector, then nothing will grow. We want growth, but we want also to protect, basically. So when I was running the ministry, it was always to make sure that we can do enough to allow industry to want to feel that they can contribute, they can invest and develop, and the consumer, which we are also supposed to protect, feel that there's enough protection, right? And if something goes wrong, you learn from it, you adapt to it, basically. So we changed that particular act to allow consumer greater choices to change from one telco to another, rather than buying them down. Just a small example.
So I think the way we regulate AI, I think we've talked a lot about it. So I'm going to focus on two areas. Because some parts of it isn't so straightforward. And one part, for example, is the use of IP in AI. And some of you might be following the New York Times and Microsoft suit against OpenAI. Basically, when ChatGPT was being trained, it was trained on millions of pages of copyrighted material. And Sam Altman admitted earlier this year to say that ChatGPT would have been impossible to create without the company's use of human-created copyrighted work for free. That is his assertion. The case, I will try to get more information about it, but it's still stuck in pre-trial stuff. So nothing substantive arguments have not been made yet. But the whole idea here is that even when you have trained the LLM, the LLM in responding to you or giving you an output may infringe copyright by copying previously what it has is in its database, and then creating an output that is based out of the copyrighted material. So those are the two main arguments that Microsoft and New York Times are bringing against OpenAI. And it's been painted in black and white terms, like either you allow us to infringe and then the world can have AI, or you kill us off. Is there a third view? There's this French research outfit called Fairly Trained, and they have said that they have built an LLM without copyright infringement. And they're also pushing for options. Basically, what this kind of conversation, this kind of argument has been around for a while. It's not again just unique to AI. And we had piracy and torrent and all that stuff. The use of copyright to benefit an artist or a creator versus the fair use and the social benefit of unlimited property. Textbooks of that, I think I can remember an exam question or essay question on that, so I'm not going to attempt that. You can try to answer that if you want, but it's going to be an ongoing thing. Property owners versus people who want to walk over the land, right? But specifically for AI, there could be a third way, which is technology can try and incorporate some kind of recognition of the royalties or the rights of the artist. There's a technical feature that doesn't necessarily, it's not impossible to do. Also, accreditation also is not impossible to do, right? So it's a question of, is it economical to do at this point? And right now, at this point, it's ridiculously expensive to do AI. An AI query, one AI query costs 10x of a normal Google search. I have it somewhere. I have the detail, yeah. So a ChatGPT query needs nearly 10 times as much electricity, 2.9 watts, to process as a Google search, which is 0.3 watts. So right now the economics of AI doesn't make sense. But when it does, then maybe we can address some of this IP stuff. So I'm just inviting you guys to think about, it's not necessarily how much we want to regulate, but how, and there are ways to allow AI and the way we live to coexist. The other thing I want to quickly mention, riding on the expensive AI thing, is data centers, right? So in 2019, Singapore imposed a moratorium, no more data centers in Singapore because electricity grid not enough. What happened between 2019 to 2022 when we lifted the moratorium? Malaysia invited Amazon and Nvidia to, and they basically went from like 500 megawatts to 1.6 terawatt. I don't know why it is, but now they're have 30x the amount of data centers that they've had over the last 3 years. Were we too fast on that? We were trying to achieve climate change goals. Paris Agreement, net zero 2050, 1.5 degrees. Then we said, hey, we can't do that. Our electricity, only 2, 3, 4, 5% is clean energy. Somewhere around there, right? So cannot lah. But then suddenly, we're losing to our neighbor. Okay, let's talk about it. So sometimes we are slow to move. Sometimes it may be too fast. It's not straightforward, it's not black and white. But that's where we SMU graduates thrive in, right?
So I'll just add on by saying that I think the fundamental question I'm trying to get is, can we allow technologies to do the right thing? Whether that decision can be made by the few or the one, right? We need to understand that in commercial interest essentially is driven by monetary pursuits. There's shareholders, there's board members, you have your parent company is giving you directions to say, I want more money out of you, therefore you have to chase this down. So in that way, that was also why when Sam Altman was kind of kicked out of the company and then how he actually got back in, that question came about. Because at least some people trusted Sam Altman, some believed that he had moral integrity to then say, let's put it under a non-profit and so on. The truth is out there, right?
Yes.
But then after that he came back in, and then recently he announced that we might want to decouple from the non-profit. We need to explore the full extent that AI can actually bring us, particularly from an LLM evolution perspective. So that's, I think, more the fundamental question. I resonate with the intellectual property access, which is, what's the feature and functionality that we want to see in the future, right? And that might be the future that we don't see or cannot dream of now. But because we haven't seen it, what are we trying to block, right? And I think, I find, going back to my social harms point, then if we are interested about illegitimate use of AI for nefarious reasons, then maybe regulating it as a criminal perspective from marketplace in the deep and dark web, selling access of deepfake solutions, revenge porn and whatnot that is inside there. Similar to what we have for bubblegum or chewing gum law, that might be addressing the social harm without curbing the technology. And then I also resonate about the ESG cost, the environment and sustainability costs, right? Because the technology itself is, without considering the electrical use, is already very prohibitive. Your NVIDIA being the juggernaut that provides the sexiest, most capable, most powerful technology that is, their backlog in terms of requests and purchase orders is beyond anybody's dreams. Their stock price has gone, I think, 1,000-fold. So that once again goes back to the economics, right? It will just go in this trajectory of infinity if uncurbed. Then is it right for the larger society? So I think just a few of these points to enrich the conversation.
Maybe I could jump in first before Prof jumps in. I scared when Prof says his answer, then I got nothing to say. But Lauren, fantastic question. How to balance innovation and regulation? I feel this is the easy question. harder question is where to balance innovation and regulation. Because you read any AI governance document out there from governments, international organizations, every single organization will say we will strike a balance between regulation and innovation. The question is where, right? But anyway, I'll answer the easy question, then we can tackle the hard question later. So easy question, frankly speaking, Singapore government there is the answers. There are answers on how to do this. And one of the key answers to this would be first to understand what are the available regulatory tools to use. Okay, what do we mean when we say regulation? Instantly, when we say regulation, first thing we think of is go to Singapore Statutes Online, AGC, all the statutes. That's not regulation, that is law. Regulation is a broader concept where it's about influencing human behavior. So that means you can do things, and this is what they call the regulatory toolbox, right? Certifications, trainings, guidance, education, then you have licensing, right? Then you step up towards laws, right? You can group them actually in a pyramid. So there is a concept called the regulatory pyramid of how you step up compliance towards hard laws rather than jumping in from the tippy top end from the start. So you start with just broad-based education first, everyone knows what's going on, then you move onwards to licensing, and then right, and so on. There are also a few other innovative tools that have come up recently. Regulatory sandboxes, for example, right? I think there was an example that was raised just now, regulatory sandboxes. You let companies run, tell them rules don't apply first. You try, then we see what the risks are. Then after that, we formulate from there. Or policy co-creation. Rather than government, Chinese saying, 班门弄斧, right? You close the workshop, then you just work internally inside, rather than talking to other people. Co-create with industry, right? Reach out, ask them, so what are your views on this policy together? Let's work on it together. So these are some of the tools that are available. So the approach to take, I would advocate, is one of smart regulation. And this is what I think we are doing in Singapore. You set the baseline first. You come up with guidance. You educate companies, you educate people on the ground. So they know this is the right path to take and they voluntarily take the path. So once they move one step upwards, then you create laws to set the baseline. Because that way you don't surprise the industry. Then you move people voluntarily one step higher, then you again set the baseline, and that's how you incrementally increase the standards for AI regulation and AI governance. That's how you do the step-by-step approach. Third point, understand the risks. When we say risks, we understand risks generally, but understand what it means at a very, very granular level. Each individual use case of an AI application, what are the risks I will face, what are the benefits, what are the trade-offs. You need to know that, so then you know exactly when to intervene, right? And I think that sheds now into the hardest question, which is for regulators, when do you time the intervention? And there is this dilemma called the Colin Ridge dilemma, which is the dilemma of if regulators jump in too early, you crush innovation. But if regulators wait and you go, then yeah, maybe innovation runs, but the risks percolate as well. And then by the time regulators want to jump in to change things, too late already, too difficult to change. Right, so these are some of the, I think, key questions and key kind of like thoughts that are percolating amongst organizations and amongst governments and regulators, not just in Singapore, but around the world as well. So I maybe pause there first.
And one last point. As I was listening to the panel talking about that, and my corporate counsel head came in and went like, okay, yes, the regulators will come up with the regulation and all that stuff, but it's a question of enforcement. Because the companies don't look at regulators first, the company looks at the market first, right? We do this for profit, and there's a profit incentive to adopt AI. Obviously, you can tell that they're just pushing forward to it. Question is, there will be some that would be like Microsoft, very visible and all that stuff, sure. They need to engage, but by and large, the majority, I think, are just going to go with whatever they can do until they cannot do it. And that's something that is reality, right? Is that necessarily good or bad? I think that's something we need to at least start to talk about. And it's difficult about, I guess, government to talk about the stuff that they can't actually enforce. I've never actually heard the government talk about the stuff that they cannot enforce. These are the rules. But we cannot enforce 50% of the cases because it's cross-border, or it's just ridiculously difficult, or it just costs too much to try and investigate. That's the reality as well. That's of the regulatory landscape.
I just add in one last point, I think, to what Ahmad highlighted earlier is the prohibitive cost for penalty is a lens that businesses wear. So, for example, right, if buying chewing gum or selling chewing gum is only a $10 penalty, but I can gain $1,000 out of that sale, okay lah, pay $10 again. Yeah. So the economic lens still comes into play despite the regulation. So the regulation must then determine what is the risk threshold for society, what's the risk and consequence benchmark that they want to set, and establish the cost prohibitive or business prohibitive penalty line, so that actually people won't cross it, even if enforcement is perfect.
Yeah.
So I think that's the business side lens that we were trying to say.
Yeah.
I'll jump in on questions 1 and 3. Jumping in on question 3 first. I'll share a story with you, right? When we lawyers, we talk about fairness, we just look at the court, there are these principles of natural justice and natural fairness, correct? So it's based on case law, etc. Mathematicians, 70 plus different definitions of fairness, mathematical definitions. So for me, actually, I'm very different from everyone else on the panel because I am not multidisciplinary, I'm unidisciplinary. My English not bad, so that's why I went to study law. So when I went to PDPC, then we were working on AI Verify, then I had to look at all those like technical calculations. Wow, really, that was I got PTSD at the view. A few years later, when people said ChatGPT, you can take a picture of the mathematical calculations, then just ask it to explain. I wish I had ChatGPT back then. But I mean, the point is this. That's why everyone harks on multi-stakeholder discussions, right? It is why in the UN, they need all these different stakeholders to come together. But that's part one of the problem solved, which is you have these stakeholders in the room. You bridge the physical silo. The other silos that are not bridged, the language silos and the mental silos, the way you think, is still different. So that is an ongoing problem. It is a human problem, and we just need to keep working on it. As long as people are mindful of it, we are able to discuss more, build more familiarity and understanding of each other. There's no simple way around it. I think that's the way to go. Regarding question 1 about how do we evolve into, how do we become a thought leader in this space? Well, last week I was in New Delhi. I was sharing at a conference about AI and cross-border data transfers. One thing I told the regulators in the room, don't FOMO, don't have FOMO, have FONT. FOMO means fear of missing out. Don't fear missing out just because you're late to the game in terms of AI regulation. Just because your initiatives don't grab headlines. Don't fear that. Fear not thinking things through properly. So that's the approach that we have in Singapore. When we were developing the model AI governance framework, very easy for Singapore to come up with our own list of principles, AI principles that were percolating around the world at that point in time. But instead, we just use existing principles. We use what was most common at the time. Fairness, explainability, transparency, human centricity, and safety. But the next step that we did was a very practical step. We translated that into what it means for organizations based on the AI deployment lifecycle. So you apply those 5 principles to the AI deployment lifecycle. What are the individual recommendations that organizations can just take up and use? Very practical, very pragmatic. That is how we become a thought leader. But I want to mention, let's go beyond thought leadership. The idea is not about thought leadership. The main idea is how do you benefit Singapore companies or the Singapore economy? How do you encourage companies from outside to come and invest into Singapore, share their expertise, share their technology, share their knowledge, and how can we help our companies push outwards? That's where AI Verify comes in, right? We shared about AI governance testing. Can you test your AI systems here in Singapore and then try and make that framework interoperable regulatory, from a regulatory perspective, with the EU AI Act, with what's coming out in the US, with what's happening in China, so that the moment your AI companies here in Singapore test using AI Verify, instantly they can go to market in China, EU, US. That is how we move forward. Yeah.
Well, okay. So let me just jump in. The second question, kind of hit me. Are we losing to bad actors? I don't think it's going to be like Terminator 2. I think people in this room grew up with that. I don't think we're gonna have Arnold Schwarzenegger knocking down our door and killing us. What sometimes keeps me up awake at night is not the machine hitting us, it's people using the machine. The people who that we have no control over, no matter how many regulations or laws we apply or enforce or implement. Because it's still a question of power versus law, right? How much you can enforce. And unfortunately, we're living in a world where possibly the rules are getting ignored because of certain interests and certain powers. And the international rules-based order is under attack. And if those bad actors or those actors decide that they want to use AI to achieve certain aims, that's what I'm afraid of. Autonomous guns, tracking, Big Brother type systems. We have laws against viruses and malware for years, but we still have Stuxnet. We still have viruses that can jump air gaps and then blow up an entire power plant, right? With AI, that's only going to get ramped up. That's also going to ramp up cybersecurity concerns, other issues of inequity and all that stuff. So AI is a massive enabler, it's a massive catalyst. If you want that AI utopia, human society needs to get better as a whole. It doesn't solve the ills that are current, but maybe it just makes it more urgent for us to address them. One thing I wanted to add also, I just wanted to kind of flag out, this AI wave is rising, and the people that are getting on and really using AI are the powerful in society. Men earning over 100K tend to be white, tend to have degrees, they tend to adopt AI more than women, non-degree holders, poor people. And that means the powerful of us, the powerful ones in society are going to get much more powerful, and the ones that lack power are going to fall behind. That is an incredible society to live in, and I hope we can address it because we still have some time. So go do an AI program with SkillsFuture or something like that, I don't know. But right now, Gartner Hype Cycle, innovation, preferably at SMU, innovation, disillusionment, now enlightenment. The products are starting to work right now. This is the time to get into it, right? What can you go into? I'm going to highlight these 4 things. You're definitely going to have a lot of training requirements. We need to bridge the gap, make people comfortable with AI, culture, change management, and stuff like that. AI integration into products and solutions. We need people to really get into the reads of it and get the technical stuff and incorporate into existing products and solutions. The back end, the data management, the facilities, the data center management, we can do that. And also the governance are definitely, there's a lot of work and job there. So be the 30% that still has a job. Don't be the one to get affected, hopefully.
So I think I would be the last for this time. The first question, I think, following on Josh's point, which is being a thought leader in the regulatory space need not be about laws. So what Singapore has generally done well across the board from regulatory perspective is actually we do fast adaptation of laws, because our administration, our judiciary is very efficient. So we can pass laws faster, we can adapt, rescind faster than most other larger states. So that's one thing that we're already leading. The second thing that's very unique and is really baked into the DNA of Singapore is that we are bridged to many different contexts. So when we bridge technology with social harms, we bridge deep IT, software development lifecycle concepts into how AI systems is going to be built in the MGF and things like that. That is where we are bringing value add into the regulatory sandbox already, or regulatory toolbox already. And in that sense, when I engage public policy writers at the international forum, they appreciate that perspective because they are still stuck in uni-discipline problems. So that's on the first question. The second question is, I think the key question is what bad actor? Which bad actor? And there are so many different classes. You have the organized crime, you have the state actor, you have the petty crime activist, the script kiddie that is just playing with the technology, didn't know what kind of harm will come out, but just let it wow. And we need to understand that technology generally, without a human actor behind it, is benign because it would actuate. And I give you the simple analogy. We are concerned about dual-use technologies. Go back to the olden days, the scissors would have been a fantastic technology, meant to just cut things up. But the same scissors held in the hands of a malicious person wants to stab and cut people, that has turned a technology that's meant for benign purposes into a malice, right? So then how do we actually address that? And that's why I think the whole panel, all of us have spoken about risk management and consequence management. That's where we want to deal with the social harms. When the social harm has an applied AI outcome, then we want to adapt our regulatory toolbox to be able to address that. The last point I think is a multifaceted one. The copyright issue is clearly struggling because of the question to originality. How can you truly determine that something is original? But it almost goes back to the fundamentals of what is original content. Today, many content that is created is adapted and a value-added outcome of something prior. Then is that still truly original content? So that kind of goes back to the fundamental, did we even need copyright? But I leave the question out there. Because today you can ask a generative AI technology, can you develop a picture of this scene in the style of X person? And that could be a famous artist, that could be a famous composer, and so on and so forth. So then where is the originality? Is it to be attributed to the technology? Sounds a bit weird. To the developer of that system? Also a bit weird, right? Or to the original person that created the style? So is the style then the only copyrightable or intellectual property protected part? So I think that goes back to the fundamental. I want to say that AI is not new. It's actually very old. We started with if then else statements. It's a very basic decision tree. If it meets this condition, therefore you take that action or give that outcome. Then it's evolved to this state where the explosion actually happened not because AI is new. The explosion happened when we had accumulated and accessed so much body of knowledge that is available in social media, World Wide Web, and any other kind of internet accessible content, right? That now enables context to be built for generative AI. I had this conversation with a technologist that said that it needed us to cross the 1 billion token threshold before this kind of generative insights could be created, right? So what has really changed in generative AI is that multimodal, multi-domain application, and then that integration towards automation, decision-making, and possibly actuation in the likes of autonomous vehicles, right? My last point is about multi-stakeholder concern. I think the one thing that we forget is cultural nuances, which is the human aspect that Josh highlighted. When I studied law at SMU, one of my profs actually said, copyright in Asian context is rubbish. Exactly to your earlier example, right? Because if we take Chinese as an example, the old composers, they write on stone carvings. And what's the reason why they put on stone carvings is because any person, if they have the ability to access that stone carving, can go there, do a rubbing, and they can translate it, bring it to wherever they are, and then carry the word across. This is before, the printing press actually happened and all that. But it's meant for sharing. I want my word to go as far as possible, and then I live and die by how much people actually appreciate it or not. It is a Western concept that created, intellectual property protection. This is mine, and then I go back to my earlier point. What is really original, right? So I think the cultural nuances come into play, and the societal inclinations of what is a harm versus what is a good must be considered in the development of regulatory toolbox. And I think that's what we've been doing so far.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I have the last word. I'm holding you back from your bedtime. I agree with all the things that have been said by the gentleman, right? But let me just add a few points, right? Today, in the Straits Times, you're still reading the newspaper, right? There was a competition about poetry for migrant workers. They will be drawing back the winner because they say some of the things were generated by AI. And they tested it. This is the world that we're entering in, right? As you say, where's the originality? And it's a tool that I think we can use. If used wisely, it will help us a lot. But we also need to understand the risk. I think essentially that's what this is all about, right? We want to use it because we know the benefits are tremendous. Right? I know of people in the civil service, as I say, using ChatGPT to write emails and papers. Nothing wrong with it, right? As long as we make sure that this is from ChatGPT. Right? My brother is a civil servant, so I won't tell you where he's working at. So I think it's a tool that I think we can use, we should use, but we should use it with our eyes open. The question is, how do you mitigate the risks? The issue of whether or not we need the right regulation, right laws, is something which society needs to talk about, right? And when I mentioned that we are late, actually we are late in one area. I think he knows this, right? A lot of the laws to keep our online space safe is actually widely in the game. Online news, PDPA, POFMA, FICA, and so on and so forth, came in response, came in response because we understood the technology whereby you can still be harassed online. Physically you can, but you can punch the guy, pushing him to the rain. What do you do online, right? So society reacts. That's a fact of life, right? Can we understand this beast 100%? I don't think so. But I think what is important is that within government and society, there is this stakeholder approach to understand and how best to navigate it so that we can use it wisely. The bad actors will always be there, right? That's why we have religion and ethics and so on and so forth. We have to deal with them. That's his business, cybersecurity, right? And it is a nightmare, right? They can use a lot of things, right? But should that prevent us from moving forward? I don't think we should do that. I think we should be brave enough to realize that we can manage this with all of our combined wisdom and knowledge to come together to deal with this, right? And actually Singapore doesn't have a choice, right? As mentioned by Josh Bear, a price taker. We have to take this technology because that's only for us to grow, right? But the government, I can tell you, is doing this with our eyes open. But does the government have all the answers? I will tell you, no, it's not possible, right? Not because we don't have smart people. We do have a lot of smart people in government, but the technology is so complex that I don't think we can find the answers that we're looking for, right? So I think, as I mentioned earlier, the video ended up that all of us have to be in this game, right? You as the end user need to give us a feedback, the problems that we face and so on and so forth. I want to end with one more consideration, because when you think about what the UN is trying to do, right, it is actually saying AI is a human right. That everyone must have access to it, right? Now, I'm not sure whether it's a reaction or something which they've thought about it, because they realize they cannot put the genie back into the bottle. It's going to come out, right? But to put it the other way around, that we must then help the global south, the people, to close the gap, I think is the right thing to do. Because whether you like it or not, as mentioned by Ahmad, the rich and the powerful will push ahead. They were not going to wait, right? And they will do that. Will Singapore wait? We will not wait. We want to push ahead because we know there will be benefits to our society, right? But at the same time, I think as a responsible member of the global community, we need to do our part also. Like what we're doing in climate change and all the other things in which we are faced, right? So I think that's where I think we should be thinking about. The technology, the laws, I think they'll get it right over time. We will learn as we go along. But until and unless you do it, we'll never know what is going on, right? So when I started the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore in 2015, we didn't have a template, we had to pull different parts. Today, CSA is a highly respected agency globally, right? It took us a long time, but I think don't think we have arrived, but we are there. We're able to do our part to protect Singapore, but also to be able to bring our ideas to the table, right, at the UN and so on and so forth, where all of these conversations are taking place. So we are small, but we try to punch above our weight, but in a useful manner, right, where we can contribute to the common good. So I think that's what we should be thinking about. So I'll end here, and thank you very much.
Just to summarize what we talked about in this panel session, a very insightful panel session, I might add. So we started off with why is AI governance important, and we talked about we want to keep our citizens safe. We want to ensure that we are helping companies comply with the existing laws such as copyright, PDPA, among many others. We also talked about how the huge impacts it has on the job market. 70%, 80% of jobs will be affected by this. We also talked about sustainability. We also talked about the fair use of the media that we're using, such as for copyrighted issues, as well as is there actually original thought? Are there any original works out there? And we also finally talked about, we talked about a lot of things. And finally, we ended off with the importance that AI is here to stay, and that we need to adapt to it, and we need to grow with it as well. And governance is just as important, and so we need to keep note of that and be aware of the incoming regulations and try to be ethical as we use them. Yeah. All right, and with that, I would like to thank you all for joining us tonight and for all